I have made thee full star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee full start of my life. I have made thee full start of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. This is the 6th class in our course on meditation. And I told you at the last class, at the end of it, that I wanted to get into a technique on concentration, a technique of concentration. I talked about the importance of concentration. This is a technique that will help you to learn it in a very dynamic way. The definition of concentration that Yogananda gave is the ability to withdraw the attention from all objects of distraction and focus them one-pointedly on any particular object. There are many techniques that are given in different religions for helping to develop this degree of concentration. Visualization exercises. In India, they might tell you to concentrate on a candle flame. Actually, however, the mind is in movement. And it's easier for the mind to relate to something that's moving. If you're watching out the window a very still scene, maybe a street with no cars on it, maybe a meadow with nobody walking on it, and then somebody starts to walk across the meadow, what do you notice? You notice the person walking. And let's say that, just so that you don't think that it's only a matter of contrast, supposing there are a lot of people walking and moving about, do you notice the still scene that they're walking through? The mind is moving and it relates to movement. And so the first thing is to concentrate on something that is moving with the mind. But then you don't want to agitate the mind with that movement. You want some kind of movement that will calm the mind, don't you? You want something that will take the mind from movement into stillness. There's another thing that is important in seeking a proper technique of concentration, and that is to think of that which you can't help noticing anyway once you become calm. When, for example, you're wanting to take a photograph at a very slow exposure, what's the first thing you learn to do? Inhale, hold the breath. It's only when you're not breathing that you can take a good photograph. The same thing if you're shooting at a target. You have to hold your breath before you can shoot. The breath is the most natural obstacle to concentration, and it's also the most natural object of concentration. It's the natural obstacle because it's that thing that makes you keep moving and keep you in a state of movement. And in fact, there's a very close relationship between the breath and the state of mind. And it works both ways. An agitated mind will make an agitated breath. An agitated breath will also agitate the mind. If you think of concentrating deeply when you're breathing like that. But the other thing is that when you're agitated, the breath becomes different. Also, it becomes excited. There is a very instant relationship between the breath and the mind. If you notice somebody going to sleep, the very moment he starts to get into subconsciousness, suddenly the exhalation becomes stronger. You find the stomach starts to pull in. And the rhythm of sleep, of breathing in sleep, is one count inhalation to 2 counts exhalation. There's a greater emphasis on the exhalation. When you wake up, there's a movement of the breath more inward. When you're excited by something, when you're depressed. In fact, there's a very intimate relationship, and I don't know whether we'll really have a chance to get into this more deeply. Obviously, I can't teach you everything in just 4 hours of tapes. But nonetheless, I can tell you that there's a very intimate relationship between the inhalation and the upward movement of energy in the spine, and the exhalation and the downward movement. So, for example, when you feel discouraged, disappointed, you not only exhale, you also you slump because the energy is moving downward. When you feel excited by something, happy that something's happening, you not only inhale, but you also stand up. There's some upward movement of energy that makes you sit up straight, look up. The two tie together, the breath and the state of mind, the breath and the movement of energy in the body. The yogis of old made a very close study of that, just as our scientists make close studies in the laboratories of chemicals and in the astronomical observatories of the stars and so on. The yogis made an intimate study, not of the body like a medical, an object for medical examination, but of the consciousness of man. And they made a very sophisticated analysis of many different mental states, how they relate to the flow of energy, how they relate to the breath, how the body affects the mind affects the body, how to bring both in harmony to help bring about well-being physically, mentally, and spiritually, how to bring about spiritual enlightenment, and so on. Now then, inevitably, when your mind becomes calm, the breath begins to be calm. You'll find that you just can't be calm when the breath is not also calm. But by the same token, when you concentrate on the breath and the mind becomes calm, as a result of that concentration, the breath becomes calmer, which makes the mind calmer. And it's really like the build-up of feedback between a loudspeaker and a microphone that's pointed toward the loudspeaker that builds up louder and louder and louder. So in this case, it gets lower and lower and lower, calmer and calmer and calmer. The mind watching this natural obstacle to concentration, which also is the most natural object of concentration, because when there's no other movement, there's still this movement. When you're concentrating on this movement, then you see, as I spoke about, the opposite to the feedback, in diminishing instead of augmenting, as the mind concentrates on that natural obstacle and object, the breath, the mind in its concentration becomes more calm. As a result, the breath becomes more calm because it reflects the natural calmness of the mind. And as the mind becomes calmer still, the breath becomes calmer still. Now, where can that lead you? Logically, it would lead you to the point where you're not breathing at all, wouldn't it? Well, logic doesn't always work, but in this case it does. The fact of the matter is that when you're really, really still, your breath stops automatically for a while. When you start thinking again, you don't have to worry that suddenly you're going to leave your body forever. But the fact is that as soon as you think, your breath will become active enough again. But as long as your mind is really still, if the body is also very still, the breath will gradually begin to reflect that point to where you aren't breathing. Now there's something else the yogis discovered, a very interesting point. And this takes you into a deeper aspect of concentration. You know what happens in sleep? Somehow the life withdraws from the senses, doesn't it? So that somebody can come into the room and call your name and you don't hear him at first. And he may shake you and then you begin as if from a long way away. If you're in deep sleep, you suddenly begin to hear him and you're saying, what? But you are so withdrawn. The energy withdraws from the surface of the body in sleep. Why? Here's what the yogis discovered. That there is an intimate corollary between the speed, the rate of the heartbeat, and the degree of sensory involvement. Children who are very much in the senses, they're always looking around and excited by things, they have a more rapid heartbeat than adults. When a person becomes very still, then his heart automatically becomes slower, and the energy begins to withdraw from the senses. Now, when the breath is calm, the heart automatically begins to slow down. There's a whole physiological reasoning behind this, and I'm not going to go into it here. Yogananda explained it at length in his lessons that his organization sends out, and I go into it in lessons that we also send out if you're interested in them. But the important thing is simply the statement at this point, that when the breath becomes calm enough, then the heart begins to slow down, and then the energy withdraws. Now, think of the other natural obstacle to the breath, to concentration. The breath moves, sure, that agitates the mind, but also as long as the energy is involved in the senses, you're going to be hearing things which, even if you really concentrate deeply and don't think about, they'll still be invading your mind to some extent. And that disturbance, an uncomfortable chair, a hurting body, little aches and pains in the spine, the taste of something that you've just eaten an hour ago, the smell of something maybe being cooked next door, which makes you think, oh, what are they eating? The sound of cars passing and children shouting, and maybe the telephone ringing, and you're wondering who wants me? Is it important? Shall I answer it? Shall I not? All of these things make meditation a lot more difficult. And whereas it's always possible to build yourself a soundproof room and just diminish the sensory disturbance to the greatest extent possible, what's even better is if you can keep a portable silence room wherever you go. And this is what yogis learned. Yogis learned how to still the senses and release all that energy that kept the mind busy in the senses, release that energy and focus it here at the point between the eyebrows. Now here's another very important point to consider. That the degree of energy in the brain determines the level of awareness. What's the difference between sleep and wakefulness? You're more aware. And what makes you more aware? Because the energy has come up instead of sort of becoming dormant. Look at the difference between stupid people and geniuses, you might say. The great difference dividing them is the level of energy. Stupid people never have energy. They might have a certain amount of physical energy. They don't have any mental energy. Geniuses, on the other hand, are noted for being people of high energy. Now, it's true, and you can experience it easily, that when you can bring more energy up to the brain, you're much more aware. When you have the energy withdrawn from the brain, you're much less aware. I talked about depression, discouragement. When that brings the energy down, you're also much less aware. You're far more aware when you're positive, when you're energetic, when you're enthusiastic, aren't you? And so, if you can learn this technique of concentration and learn to withdraw the energy gradually from the senses and learn to direct all that energy upward, it's not only that you'll be united and so on. It's hard to visualize all those things clearly until we bring in this one missing factor of the degree of awareness. When the energy is raised up here, you're so vividly aware that you'll feel that just as when you wake up from sleep, you're awake, you're no longer asleep. When you wake up from this wakefulness in superconsciousness or in ecstasy, you feel now you're awake, and until then, you've been asleep. And again in the spiritual and mystical writings of the world, you will find them speaking about using such expressions as divine awakening, or I was asleep and now I've awakened, or remember the expression in the Bible, sleepers awake. The sleepers are not dead people, except in the sense that Jesus spoke of people as dead. That is to say, they're alive, but they aren't living. They exist, they aren't alive. And so, in this state of awakening from your sleep, that is the state of ecstasy, the state of God vision, or I should say it leads to that state of God vision when you become more aware of yourself on your own higher level. Super consciousness is actually that. You're super aware, you're much more aware. Now this technique of concentration then is not to be understood only in a sort of a dull sense, perhaps you might almost say passive sense of withdrawing the energy from objects of concentration, placing them one-pointedly on one thing at a time. What happens when you learn high super concentration is that in that concentration on one thing at a time, you become much more aware. And in that awareness, then when you enter that state of awareness, suddenly your mind, from being narrowed, becomes broad. You think, oh, I don't want to narrow my mind, I don't want to become small. But think of a person wanting to sew a shirt, let's say. First he has to thread the needle. He has to bring that thread to a fine point before it will go through the eye of the needle. And he couldn't possibly thread the needle if he says, I'm going to get this thing and it kills me, and he tries to push it through. You have to work with things as they are. You can't make them different. You can't force yourself into the kingdom of heaven. You can't drive your way through the wall of silence into the infinite. You have to do it very sensitively. But when you learn that kind of concentration that brings you really to one point, then suddenly you go through the eye of the needle, then you can sew. You can sew your garment of light. You can create your new vestments of divinity. So concentration is necessary. First it's a limiting, but it's sort of like the training you go through when you go to college in order to get a better job. You have to learn certain things before you can do well. It's like the work of somebody who wants to play the piano well and therefore does these finger exercises, right? So with your practice of meditation and concentration, remember this, that once you enter into that state of silence, then you're more aware of, as well as just being more aware with. You're more aware of anything that you direct your attention to. You're aware of nuances in things. You're able to draw on greater inspiration. You're able to solve your problems. All of these things come from having heightened your awareness, and that heightened awareness comes from learning to concentrate. Now, the beauty of this technique of concentration is that it doesn't take you outward, like concentrating on a candle flame takes you outward. But the breath is about the nearest thing you've got to you, isn't it? And when you watch the breath, then you automatically find your energy going inward. You automatically find your energy going upward, because a calm breath takes the mind upward. So what am I telling you? By now it should be very clear. What I'm telling you is watch the breath. Don't control the breath. Don't try to breathe one way or another. Just watch it. Let it go as it will. Now, if you are all excited and you find that you're very physically conscious, then watch the lungs pumping in and out if you like. Probably, and this is a good thing to do, it would be good to do a few things first. All the various things I told you. Incidentally, one thing I forgot, and I'll mention it now because it's helpful. Incense. Why incense? There's something about incense in itself that helps to uplift the mind, but there's something else too. The soul, the sense of smell is closely associated with memory. Whenever you go into a place and you smell something that you smelled in a place when you were a child, so instantly that smell brings you back more than perhaps any of the other senses. And so if you use incense when you meditate, then every time you meditate, that sense of incense, that smell of incense, will recollect you and draw you back to the mood of your meditation room. So it's a help. Anyway, begin your meditation in the various ways that I told you, with deep breathing. Inhale, counting 12, hold, counting 12, exhale, counting 12, and so on. Then inhale, tense the whole body, throw the breath out and relax. Do that 2 or 3 times. Concentrate on space, and with bringing space into the body, bringing light and space out into the whole universe, offering yourself up into that light through the spiritual eye. Chanting. We'll talk about chanting later on. But chanting too can help to calm the mind. If you chant, do it before you do this deep breathing. Then the deep breathing will automatically purify the blood of a lot of the carbon. You'll exhale it in the form of carbon dioxide. In this way, gradually you'll become calm, so that when you actually begin watching the breath, you're not like that, but you'll see the breath already fairly calm. Now, before you begin this technique, always inhale, exhale. and then wait for the breath to come in. Begin with an exhalation. When the breath comes in, of its own accord, mind you, but it's coming in of its own accord, then there's something else I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to practice what they call in India a mantra. A mantra is certain sounds that exercise an effect over the nervous system, over the energy in the body, over the mind. Even there are certain mantras that exercise a certain amount of power over objective things. Mantras that you can recite in order to overcome obstacles, for example. In this case, what we have is a mantra that vibrates on a subtle level with the breath. That on a subtle level, these are the sounds that the breath has been heard to make. Hong as it comes in, sa as it goes out. Hong, sa. Do these words have meaning? Yes, they do. Actually, the Sanskrit words are aham saha, which means I am he. But this becomes made into a mantra. The hong is I. And you know how when you ring a bell, the gong sound goes outward? So that thinking of I, not as aham, which is an affirmation I, but hong dissolves that sense of I. Hong helps to expand your sense of self into something greater. And sa, instead of saha, sa, so that you feel the peace of the Spirit. This becomes a mantra instead of simply a statement uttered in Sanskrit. And there are different ways that you'll find it pronounced, because a very ancient language has found different expressions in different parts of India. But the way that my guru, my teacher, Paramahansa Yogananda, used to put it was Hong Sa. Hong Sa. I am He. I am the infinite. There's another interesting point here. His name was Paramhansa, or the way they pronounce it in Bengal, Paramhansa. Hong Sa. Why? You see, Hangsa or Hangsa also means swan. Now, why swan? That seems like a silly thing to bring in. But you see, swan has a very deep sort of allegorical meaning, metaphorical meaning. A swan is equally at home on land and in water. And so one who is enlightened is equally at home on the dry land of spirit and in the upheaving waters of delusion, you might say. And, or you could put it the other way around and talk about the dry land of matter and the fluid land of spirit, but equally at home in both worlds. And a Paramhansa means a supreme swan, one who is completely at home. And there's another thing about the swan, that it is said, at least mythologically, I'm willing to believe it, but I can't say I've ever observed it, but they say that a swan is able to take milk in its mouth and separate the curds from the whey, presumably because it has a certain acid there that coagulates the milk. At any rate, the idea here is that a Paramhansa is able to discriminate between truth and falsehood, reality and dream and illusion. And so Hang Sha, Hang Sa, is a mantra that affirms that I am that swan of the Spirit, that infinite one, that discerning one who sees truth from error. But this is a subtler point, and much easier is it when practicing the mantra itself to think I am He, Hang Sa, or in fact not to think of the meaning. It's not that important to think of the meaning so long as you keep the vibration there. The vibration of the words, Hang Sa, has a calming effect upon the mind. So when the breath comes in, mentally follow it. Don't try to breathe in, just let it come in of itself. Mentally follow it with the chant Hang. Don't inhale in order to chant, don't exhale in order to chant, but let the chant follow the breath. Then when the breath comes out of its own accord, follow it mentally with the chant, Sa. Now there's an important point here to keep in mind too, that what you want to do is gradually increase the pauses between the breaths. So that while you don't hold the breath particularly, holding it like that, mentally enjoy that pause. So that in that very enjoyment of the peace of breathlessness, that pause automatically, if ever so slightly, expands. And every time you've exhaled, try to sink deep into that peace again. And gradually those pauses become longer and longer. And then maybe suddenly the breath will start again. You know, the thing is that we've been living in this body for so many years that we're used to it. We're used to breathing, and we're startled when we find ourselves suddenly completely still. Don't worry about it. My guru's guru, Sri Yukteswar, his name was, used to say that the soul is like a bird that's been in a cage for 20 years. If you open the door of the cage and say, all right, bird, now you can fly, the bird will huddle in there and be afraid to come out because he's used to being in a cage, even though it's his nature to go out and fly. And so our real nature, remember, the soul loves to meditate. It's the ego that resists meditation. And the more you get into soul consciousness, the more you'll want to fly. So don't worry about it. If for a while your breath becomes calm, and then you find these pauses extending, and suddenly it's a natural reaction of the ego. Wait a minute, what about my body? What about my nice little cage? But just say, all right, cool it. I'm not forcing anything on you. And coax him bit by bit. You'll find that after a bit, it will begin to enjoy these pauses, and they'll become natural to you, until finally, to be completely still on all levels is absolutely native to your state of being. Now, one thing might help you is that as the breath is coming in, this will help you to differentiate between the inhalation and the exhalation. Bring the forefinger of the right hand toward the palm, and as the breath is going out, let it come away from the palm. Now, Yogananda didn't explain this, but there's something interesting that occurred to me that I'll share with you, and I think it may make it more meaningful to you, I don't know. But the thing is that in India, when they speak of the hand, they speak of the forefinger as expressive particularly of the ego. That's why when you use your finger to point, your mother will have told you, don't point. Why? Because it's rude. Why is it rude? Because it's looking as if you're imposing yourself on somebody. And this ego, when you bring it in, you're sort of affirming yourself. But then when you release it with Sa, you're saying, oh no, I don't need this ego. I offer it into the infinite. And so each time you bring it in, you're just sort of, you might say, gathering for a new self-offering, gathering yourself together to give yourself even more. And even the movement of the finger can help in that self-offering, you see? So as the breath is coming in, you say Hang, and you can bring the forefinger toward the palm. As it goes out, say Sa all the way, and let the forefinger go out. Now this technique, if you can practice at least half an hour every day, will be very important to help you develop concentration. Then when you pray, then when you meditate, you'll be meditating and praying much more effectively. Don't ever leave your meditation just after the techniques. It's sort of like preparing a meal and going out somewhere and forgetting the meal, or eating the meal and then not enjoying it afterwards and getting indigestion as a result. Instead of sitting down and letting the meal digest, you go out and run a race. What is the soul's power of knowing God? Intuition. This is the definition of intuition, the soul's power of knowing God. And intuition develops the more you can prolong the enjoyment of the peaceful after effects of practicing the techniques. So at least a quarter of your time of meditation, this should be a rule, at least a quarter of the time you spend in meditation should be spent just enjoying those peaceful after effects. Don't do the techniques and then off you go. Spend that time trying to go deeper and deeper into the awareness of that inner kingdom. Now then, let's practice again together. I have to always think here that I don't want to go beyond the length of the tape, and therefore I can't right now put you through your paces and go into a half-an-hour meditation with you. But let's just assume that we've done our 12, 12, 12, or if you can even make it 20, 20, 20, that's fine. But inhalation, holding, and exhalation equal, all three. Don't hold out, just inhalation, holding, exhalation. Let's assume you've done that. Do it 6 or even 12 times. Then, inhale, tense, exhale, and relax. Do that again. Inhale, tense, exhale, and relax. Now then, feel your body completely relaxed, be completely still. I won't go through all that process of relaxation, but I'm going to ask you now to inhale. Fill your body with air, oxygen, energy. Exhale. And wait for the breath to come in of its own accord. When it does, mentally chant Hung. And when it goes out, mentally chant Sa. Let's do that together. Every now and then check your body to make sure it's relaxed. Now, while you're practicing, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more. Where should you concentrate on the breath? If your lungs are still restless, you'll be thinking more in terms of their movement, but as they become calm, concentrate on the breath as it enters the nostrils. And the higher your consciousness, the more the breath will move in the upper part of the nostrils. A person of low consciousness, the breath moves more in the lower part, even to the point where you find that he keeps his mouth open all the time. Feel the air moving now upward to the point where it enters the head cavity at the beginning of the nose, which is right near the point between the eyebrows. Feel the breath moving there. Hung and Sa. And because it's so close to the spiritual eye, you can almost identify the two. And as your mind becomes even stiller, you could even think of it as just consciousness or light flowing in and out through the spiritual eye. But it may be better just to think of breath. If so, then do so. Now we'll end it. I won't take you into a long meditation, but always end your practice of Hong Sa this way. Inhale. Exhale 3 times. And then remain without breath as long as it's comfortable, concentrating at the point between the eyebrows. All right for now.